Hi, welcome to Clubs and Culture for September 23rd, 2018. We're up to the 1937, right? 1937 Best Picture winner. The Life of Emile Zola. Zola was a French author. His most famous work is Nana, which is about a 3 years in the life of a French prostitute, Paris prostitute. This movie mostly centers on the Dreyfus affair, which Dreyfus was an army captain that was falsely convicted of treason, partially because he was Jewish, and partially because the guy who actually committed treason by forwarding evidence to the Germans was just well liked. And Zola was a muckraker trying to get him freed, and so most of the film is centered on him. Zola's effort to free Dreyfus, and this movie's okay. It's what I like to refer to as an important subject movie, where really the main interest in the film is sort of what the movie's own. Like, it's not really interesting cinematically or in terms of the art. It's just sort of the important subject that's interesting. It's a pretty good film. I think I give it a 7 overall. My main issue with it, and I'll talk about this when I show the clips in the trailer, is Emile Zola. Him being a writer, it's like the first 25 minutes of the film, and that stuff is just boring and just not well. It gets so much better when you get to the Dreyfus affair. That I really wish this was the life of Captain Dreyfus or the Dreyfus affair, and I wouldn't necessarily change that. It's like the story's framed wrong, so let me bring up some clips. Okay, so the movie, Zola's played by this guy named Paul Mooney, who gives a very good performance. One of the things I do like about this film a lot is Zola, as an author, was very much stressed naturalism, and he wanted characters to not appear larger than life in his books. And so if you actually read stuff like Nana, which is probably his most famous work, his characters seem very ordinary and then kind of simple, straightforward, everything like that. So this movie does have a nice sort of restrained tone for the most part, which I think is a good way of honoring his work. My big problem with it, though, and before we get to the clips, is why I'm talking about this, is the Dreyfus affair story is just so much more interesting than him, this 30-minute segment of him getting inspired by to write Nana. And I feel like they should have done one or two things. Either they should have spent more time, because Nana's actually a book in a series of 20 books about the Second Republic in France. They could have just done a series of him meeting the various inspirations for his books, and then ended with Nana, because Nana's like the 9th book in the series. That could have been the climax, which would have been interesting. Or they could have entirely cut that stuff out and refocused it entirely on the Dreyfus affair, and then sort of reversed the protagonist and have it Captain Dreyfus, not Zola, because it's much more interesting if they would have done that. And so because of that, I feel like the film is kind of at war with itself, because it's the first 25 minutes isn't really about that, but it's like the Dreyfus affair is sort of emotionally centered on Zola getting his muckraking firebrand self back in order, and that's sort of his story. Like, he gets old, like he gets early success, and then gets complacent, and then the Dreyfus affair kicks him into high gear, which is true, and it works for like the life of Emile Zola, but as a story, it feels a little bit repugnant, because Dreyfus was falsely imprisoned and he was persecuted because he was Jewish and a whole bunch of other things, and it feels like you should focus on him as the story. Give me a sec. Likewise, sort of in terms of just this movie aging, Zola is, as an author, isn't really taught at least in my experience in literature, he's not really taught today. And I've only read a couple of his books because of this movie. So there's less of it. So the Dreyfus affair, I think, feels more prominent. So even though a movie that's sort of about Emile Zola generally, it's still the Dreyfus affair takes up so much space. I do think the film does get points for being largely accurate when it comes to the Dreyfus affair. It's actually remarkable. Some of the courtroom lines are taken directly from it. And again, going back to that 25 minutes when it's him being an author, it's greatly inaccurate, because it seems like Nana's his first book when in fact it's like his 10th, and everything like that. I do like the direction in this film, how it's very restrained and sort of naturalistic. It's very not 1930s. It's one of the reasons why I think the film mostly holds up. Is that okay? So I'm going to show some clips, and it's going to be mostly about Captain Dreyfus, because again, I think he should be the center of the story here. And Joseph Schlangenkraut, the guy who plays him, does a really good job. I wish I could speak better. Okay, so this is after his trial, and he's Jewish, and he's being convicted, and he's going to be paraded here. He's going to be stripped of all his honors before being sent to Devil's Island. And I really like this performance. It's very restrained, and he's been restrained and bottled up the entire time. And there's a very quiet, soulful dignity to how he's being played here. Because, okay, so if you don't know the story, a French war cabinet member forwarded secrets to the Germans, and it was handwritten, and they had him write something out, and a non-handwriting expert, and handwriting experts to begin with are kind of bullshit, said, oh yeah, that's identical, and that's basically why he was convicted. And he was specifically targeted first for the investigation because he is Jewish and then Hungarian born, even though he's in France. And so there's this undercurrent to the Dreyfus affair, or maybe not so much. There's a less focused aspect on this movie about anti-Semitism. In any case, I really like his sort of quiet dignity here, and how he just he knows he's innocent, he knows he's bullshit, and he has such a quiet, reserved, stoic dignity to him, and he's had this in the entire time. And he's getting all his medals and stuff ripped off, and his sword destroyed. And this is, he's been in the army for 20 years, and then there's this great sort of moment where he finally just breaks through, and he's just too much for him to bear, and he starts screaming, "I'm innocent," at the newspaper. But even then, he manages to say, "Gentlemen of the newspapers, I'm innocent." And it's such a great performance. It's really emotionally powerful. Anyway, so this is the scene where he is freed, and the two reasons why I'm showing it again, it's a quiet, emotionally gripping performance, but I really like the choice. I don't know if it was him, I don't know if it was anything in the script, but either his choice or the writer's choice to have him not have a line, because this is something that it's far more powerful if the line's not said, because what you say after being falsely imprisoned for 10 years, 15 years or something like that. And then there's this great little cinematic language of him exiting his jail cell, and then going back and exiting a couple of times, and it's very cinematic, and it's so much better because they don't use words. Yeah. Now, with all that being said, I still feel sort of directorially this movie is a bit at war of itself, because it's very naturalistic in most places, but every once in a while you have sort of theatrical moments. This is the most restrained one, and I think it's well enough because that feels very realistic, but Here, this is okay. So Zola wrote this thing called I Accuse, which he accused the French system of being corrupt, and he's put on trial for basically undermining the army. That guy in the middle is the actual traitor. He was actually tried and found innocent to protect them fucking up in the Dreyfus case. And so there's this great scene, which again directorially it's mostly sort of works in terms of the scene unto itself, because Zola's lawyers are going to ask him a whole bunch of questions, and he's just going to be facing away from them, and he's just sort of nonchalantly standing, and it's this sort of striking image of a person that you know is a traitor getting away with it. This is the shot I mean, but at the same time, maybe it's close enough to what's naturalistic, but at the same time it seems much more theatrical, and that shot sticks out in my mind because it's sort of the most striking image in the courtroom sequence. And maybe I feel like it's just a bit too far in the theatricality, where it would have been better if they had a more restrained sort of blocking of the scene, or they sort of forego trying to be like Zola's books, and been more sort of 1930s staging and blocking, and more dramatic, more theatrical. There's that. And then probably the biggest sin on this regard is Zola's going to have a big speech in a moment. Here it is. This is the beginning of it, or the end of it, where he's walking around doing his big last part of his defense. And while I like Paul Mooney's performance here sort of theatrically, and it's a powerful performance, it sort of stands out as a theatrical aspect that's not kind of at war with the rest of the naturalistic tone of the writing and film. And there's specifically this one moment where he sort of, after he's found guilty, Zola's found guilty, sentenced to a year in jail and 3,000 francs, he'll say cannibals, and that's all. And like that works, and it sort of works for the scene, but it sort of stands out tonally because the first 25 minutes of this film are very, very naturalistic and very much like a Zola novel. So in the end, I like this film. I think it handles the history relatively well. It's relatively well written. I think the entire story is framed wrong. I think it should be Dreyfus, and then I think directorially it couldn't quite pick a tone. It's not quite uneven or too. It just wanted to know if it wanted to, how far to go into naturalism or not. So it's an important subject movie, and it's good in that sense because it's a good movie. And so everything like that. So that's going to be it for Cubs and Culture. See you guys tomorrow.